Greetings, mathematicians! I thought I'd make a quick video to review factoring quadratics. For those that were absent, for those that need extra review, or if you've been working with a tutor or a parent and they haven't seen the method before, that way they can catch in on what we're doing. If someone shows you a different way that makes sense, please feel free to do that. This is just one of the ways that we have found as math teachers makes it a little bit easier to get going. But once you're confident, or if you learn another way, please use it. We're going to start off by factoring the quadratic, and we're going to call this the AC method, which means we're going to use the x and then grouping, okay? So in Algebra 1, we have been using the grouping option. So first step is to identify your A, your B, and your C. We have these steps written out in our notes, so if you need to refer to them, please do so or get someone else's notes to copy down. Second step is to multiply your A times your C value, and you get your top of your X. Then you take your B value and you put it in the bottom of the X. Now this is just a template to help us organize our thoughts. There's no math behind this, it's just a way to organize our thinking so we don't get lost. So next, we need to find two factors of 20 that multiply to get 20, but can combine to get 9. Now, if you can't think of those guess and check numbers in your head, then write them out. So factors of 20 are 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 3 doesn't work, 4 and 5, and then if I get to 5, I'm repeating myself. So out of those, which ones can get us to 9? 1 and 20, definitely not. 2 and 10 could get us to 8 or 12, but 4 and 5, that would work. So here, take a moment to check yourself. There's a lot of checkpoints in this. If I take a look, 4 times 5 is 20. 4 plus 5 is 9. So I know I'm correct so far. Okay, next step, we're going to take our two new values and we're going to break apart our middle term, bring down the x, we're going to separate that 9x into a 4 and 5x. We're breaking it apart. Then we just bring down the first and last term. Okay, at this point, our step is to now use grouping, which was another lesson. So remember, 4 steps for grouping. First step you're going to use is to put parentheses around the first two and the last two terms. Okay. Next, you're going to take a GCF out of the first set, and in this case, my GCF is x. If I divide both terms by x, I get an x and a plus 4. Take a GCF out of the second set. I can divide out a positive 5, which leaves me with an x and a plus 4. Third step is again sort of another checkpoint. You need to check and make sure that your parentheses are the same. If they're not, something's wrong, okay? The problems I'm going to give you so far in this lesson are all going to work out. They don't always work out. In the future, we'll approach that. But in this lesson, they should be the same. If not, check your work. The last step of grouping is to take your common parentheses, your common factor. If I divide it out, then I write what's remaining. Remaining is my GCFs of an x and a positive 5. So there we have found our final answer. We have factored the quadratic and gotten two binomials. So a little bit of what we talked about in class is that yes, you can go straight from these x values to your answer, but that's only because the leading coefficient is 1. In the future, if that leading coefficient is not 1, we can't skip grouping. Okay? So to start off, don't skip the grouping steps. In the future, we'll work towards that. All right, let's take a look at another one that has some negative signs. So to start off, let's identify our A is 1, our B is -4, and our C is -12. So watch out for those signs, they stay with the values. So if I do A times C, that would be -12. My B value is -4. Next, I need to find two factors that multiply to get 12, but can combine, meaning adding or subtracting, to get -4. If you can think through those numbers and do that process in your head, feel free to do so. If you need to write out your factors, please do so. So 1 times 12, 2 times 6 gets me to 12, and 3 times 4 gets me to 12. Now ignore the signs for right now. Let's just worry about the numbers. A 1 and 12 can't get me to 4. A 2 and a 6 can if I subtract them. A 3 to 4 can't get me to 4. So it means it's 2 and it's 6. But now I have to mess with the signs. If you can think through your multiplication rules with signs, then you might not need to guess and check. But as I take a look here, I know one of them has to be negative because a negative times a positive gets me to a negative. So let's say I just throw a negative on the 2. Then we have to check. Don't just leave it there. Check your work. A -2 times a 6 is -12. A -2 plus a 6 is not -4. So right there, I can see that that negative should not be on the 2. So let's try it on the 6. Check your work. 2 times -6 is -12. 2 plus -6 is -4. So therefore, I know I got the right values this time. Okay, next we want to separate that middle term into our new middle terms, a positive 2x and a -6x. We bring down our first and last term. All right, let's do some grouping. So now when we do grouping, our steps are to group the first two and the last two and include their signs. Take out a GCF from each parenthesis. Here I can divide an x out of both. Oh, here I've got two negatives, so I can actually divide both by a -6. If I divide by a -6, I end up with an x and a +2. Here's our next checkpoint. Did we get the same thing twice? We did. So that means I can divide out an x plus 2 and write what I have remaining, which is my GCFs of x and -6. That is my final answer. And here's what's nice, you guys. On a test, if you're unsure, you can check your work. You could FOIL, distribute, or box and end up back at the question. So feel free to do that on a test if you got extra time. Let's take a look at one more. Again, the signs are going to play an important role here. So first of all, identify your A, your B is -11, your C is +18. So A times C gets me +18. My B value is -11. I need two values that multiply to get 18, but add or subtract to get 11. So let's write out my factors. 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6, 4 doesn't work, 5 doesn't work, and then I'm repeating myself with the 6. Now, which of those could get me to an 11? Definitely not 1 and 18. 3 and 6 can't. 2 and 9 can. So let's use 2 and 9. Now my numbers have to multiply to be 18, but add to be -11. So here's that special thing we have to keep an eye out for, is when we're multiplying to be positive, they either both have to be positive or both negative. So let's try negatives. Here's your checkpoint. Is -2 times -9 +18? Yes. Is -2 plus -9 -11? Yes, it is. So we know our signs worked out correctly. All right, let's split up our middle terms. We now have a -2x and a -9x from our x's over here. Bring down your first term and your last term. All right, now let's take care of grouping. Let's group our first two and last two. On my first two, my GCF is x, which leaves me with an x minus 2. My next step is I'm going to divide out a 9. If I divide out a 9, I have a negative x and a positive 2. Here's our checkpoint. Uh-oh, I don't have the same thing twice. So I have to reconsider something. If I take a look, I took out a positive 9. Even though they're both not negative, they both are not negative, I can still try taking out a negative. If I take out a negative 9, that would leave me with a positive x and a negative 2. Hey, now if I look at my check, now it's right. So here's just a little hint. If these two are negative, you're probably gonna have to take out a negative. So keep that in mind. Just work it through until you get the same thing twice. You gotta do a little bit of work. So now my common factor is x minus 2. My GCFs are x minus 9. There are my two factors. That would get me to my quadratic. Okay, an additional method, if you're struggling with the grouping, that could help you out is using a box. Now I know some of you use the box for multiplying, or in our Algebra 1 block class, we have factored using the box. This is another method. It just helps you organize your thoughts more. It's just grouping in a box instead of in a straight line. It's no extra work or less work. It's just a different way to think it through. So I'm just going to show one example of how that works out. Follow the same steps to start off. First, identify your A, your B, your C. Multiply your A times C. Put your B in the bottom. Find two values that multiply to get negative 27, but can combine to get negative 6. My factors of 27 are 1 and 27, 2, 3 and 9, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are my only factors. So in the end, 3 and 9 are my values. But now let's take a look at the signs. One of them is going to be negative. So in this case, because my B value is negative, here's a hint. That means my larger value has to be negative. But here's my check. Checkpoint is to see if it works. Is 3 times negative 9 negative 27? Yes. Is 3 plus negative 9 negative 6? Yes. So we're good to go. So here's what's different. When we split up our middle values, we're just going to put them in boxes. So here I've got a 3x and a negative 9x. Those are my middle values. You bring down your first value goes in the first box, or first term. Your last term goes in the last box. We could write them in a line or we can write them in a box. It doesn't matter. We still apply the same rules. Factor out a GCF out of everything. So if I factor out of this column, I can take an x out. If I factor out of this column, I can take a negative 9 out. If I factor out of this row, I could take an x out. If I factor out of this row, I can take a 3 out. Here you follow the rules. If it's a double negative, you take that negative out. If both of your middle values are negative, then both of your numbers are negative. We talked about that in class, but you would also notice, you would notice if you needed them to be both negative. So let's write it out as a final answer. I've got an x minus 9 and an x plus 3. Those come from my top of my columns and to the side of my rows. So the box is just like grouping. It's just organized a little differently. So Again, use this video if you were absent, if you need the extra help studying, or if someone's helping you and they need to understand the methodology that we're using. If they show you another way, if another way makes sense, feel free to use it. Let me know if you need more help or more examples. Alrighty, have a good one, and we'll see you next time.